system, what it means to be someone who also loves to engage community, loves to build partnership. So Oscar Harris, in particular, I will let you know, originally I am from the South. So when my Southern vernacular slips out, it is totally okay. We're going to have fun today. And I will say things potentially like all y'all and all those different things. But I would like to say welcome. And Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Jenkins Rosenkrantz, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Um, I am not from down south. However, Oscar and I work so closely together, I might sound like I am. So thank you for coming today.
So if we can, very much so, we're interested in knowing who is on the webinar. And according to my understanding, it is individuals that's in the education system and individuals that worked with prevention, intervention, and possibly post-intervention. So I can tell you our desire today is very much so to kind of share about the things that happened within Spokane Public Schools with a heavy emphasis on looking at data, as well as data-driven dialogues, as well as data-driven decision-making, because we can say that's at the core of what we do and what we have done that afforded us the opportunity to be able to, to get certain incremental success is what I call it, because everyone who's listening knows that the work is hard, and I highly recommend that you take time, or we take time, to kind of celebrate different types of things. Especially no matter how small the success is, it's still a success and it's still a win. And so to set the context, Spokane Public Schools considered it vacillates between the second and third largest school district in the state of Washington. And we have around 30,000 students in particular, and they coming from various backgrounds. Within our school district, there are over 70, 80 different languages represented. There are also over 200 different sovereign tribes or sovereign nations represented when it comes to Native Americans. And we sit in a very unique place within the Pacific Northwest. And I shared all that in context because as we began to start talking about data and data-driven dialogue and et cetera, all of those were data points that I just shared in particular that guides the decision in terms of how we do what we do, how we invest the resources in the particular areas that they need to go in. And so what you have the opportunity, if you look on the slide, you'll see the different elements that make up our department. And I can tell you our department within Spokane Public Schools is fairly, I'll say it's fairly new. I mean, you're talking about 4 years later. It started with 3 individuals, myself, Nicole, and another individual by trade that was a trained attorney that was working with us in our program as we began to start looking at family and community engagement. And so now I can tell you we boast a staff of 25, which I think is a testament to the work of the team, as well as a testament to the effectiveness of what we've been able to pull out. And when I say effectiveness, we're talking about research-based as well as being able to track our data in terms of how we're moving the needle when it comes down to certain metrics. So at this time, I want to turn it over to Nicole a little bit.
So if you look at the areas that we cover, you'll see that we are the safety net for the populations that usually are high in the data of pushouts, of exclusions. So we support students with the whole child. And so we look at 2-generation mentoring models, meaning that we can do a lot of work with students in the time that we have them in the school day, but also realizing there's situations that they're going home to. So how can we also uplift families so that they feel supported and know that we understand and care for their entire situation in order for their child to be successful in our schools. With that, we also need strong community connections, because different resources that families may need. There may be food insecurity, there may be housing insecurity. And what we found in our department is usually folks will reach out and it may be because their child is struggling with some behaviors. But once we get to know them and actually build that bridge for relationships that usually hasn't been there between schools and communities, we're able to access the supports necessary for the whole family to reach success.
Yep. And also what I would add to that in particular is even at looking at, how data plays a part in what we do in particular. One thing that our department had discovered through a few type of things, and we'll get more into the data element specifically later, but our department is definitely poised to be able to gather that qualitative data that oftentimes school districts are not designed to gather. And the cool thing is that there's a lot of products and softwares out there now that can help individuals to be able to get different type of perception data and et cetera. And I can tell you that that has been something that has been critical for the transformation of Spokane Public Schools, as well as us being able to implement different things that we're able to do. And so I think very much so, even as we talk about the data, when we begin to start exploring this data-driven decision type making, we have like some examples that it came into play, but it's also an example that lines itself with things that happen in a larger context, even when we look at the national narratives going on. And Nicole can share and kind of start out about that particular element in the district.
I think the other important bridge with community is not just resources, but also when we're working in the school district and we see that there are areas that need to be changed that, traditionally, again, what is it? We focus on arithmetic and, and reading, the 3 R's, whatever those were. But what we need is also community partners that will push the school district to really think about different ways of addressing the issues that they're seeing. And so an example of that is what brought about, in 2020, social unrest, COVID, all of the things, the perfect storm. That was a time where, because of our community relationships, parents and organizations like even, like the ACLU, were coming to us with concerns about our data and that we were not serving our students as we should. And, even pointing out that Spokane Public Schools mission statement is excellence for everyone. And so with that mission statement, the opportunity was not made possible for every student. Every student wasn't experiencing excellence. And so out of that time, our school board president wanted to address kind of the shutdown and all the social unrest, and wanted us to actually reach out to our families that we serve and tell them, like, we see you, we're thinking of you. And with that, so I was approached to co-write something, and we started actually I started thinking about, I'm kind of tired of hearing statements, you're in our thoughts, know that we're thinking of you, and, we're still here, but what does the action behind that look like? And so out of that, we started writing an equity resolution, and I'm just going to highlight a part that's not on the slide, just a little piece of it. So let's see. Okay, the mission of Spokane Public Schools is to provide excellence for everyone, yet this opportunity has not been made possible for every student. The national crisis of racism has been reflected in both recent and historical events, highlighting the injustice and discrimination that is pervasive through our culture and institutions. And we realize that structural racism is built into the bones of our schools as well as every structure in society. We have to build anti-racism into the bones in order to increase student empowerment, belonging, value, and hope for the future. That was adapted from Ijeoma Alua. We have gathered extensive community feedback through the last several years from community stakeholders, educators, parents, and students on how to improve the educational experience of students. However, there is more work to be done, and we are committed to change in order to truly live our vision of excellence for everyone. So out of that statement, so the board adopted the resolution and then turned it into policy. And so, Oscar, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of policy.
Yeah, so when we began to start, and many of you are aware of this, that when you're looking at tackling challenges and issues that are so large, right? And the hard thing I'll say about being within education systems is that many of you understand that it's a microcosm of the community. Whatever's happening in the community, whatever's happening in the nation is happening within the school. And you being within that system, no matter what your role is, interventionist, teacher, superintendent, or whatever, you're tasked with dealing with complex issues that's facing the community that seems to converge within the school day. And there's challenges that come up in particular. And so oftentimes what individuals need when those type things happen, they need actual resources. And some of the resources I'm talking about is having clear policies, procedures about how you're going to begin to start working with the particular challenges that exist and the implementation of certain practices. Through this equity resolution, it had policy wrote in it, or that we would create policy, as well as we'll have practices, as well as we would look at how we allocate resources, which, there is a framework that is not here that talks about when you want to begin to start improving systems, when you want to begin to start making the experience of school accessible and safe for everyone. There are certain things you have to do when you begin to start looking at systemic change. And so the three things I gave you in particular would be considered the top tier of things that happened. And through the equity resolution, it afforded us the opportunity to do that. And I'd be remiss to say that when I say we, I am really talking about community. And when I say community, I am talking about school, because something that I know personally that happened, even upon taking on the roles in our team, navigating what I consider that line between community and school, I discovered that our cultures have created a divide between school and community. And so I was in a situation to where I often told community members, that, hey, I'm part of the community too. Teachers are part of the community too. I mean, we shop at the same grocery stores. We may debate on James. This is towards you a little bit, man. We may debate on who is the better team, when it comes to our favorite sports team and all those types of things. But at the end of the day, we all interface with the community, and that separation which existed did not serve us well. I will say that in particular. Sometimes on the education end, traditionally it was like, okay, let me handle your student when I'm at school. And then when you go home as a parent, you say, let me handle your student when they're at school. And I can say, if the pandemic didn't teach us anything else, the necessity of us working together, blurring those lines a little bit more is critical. And when you do that, I talked about the top tiered level of what happens when you're looking at system change. The next tiered level has to do with relationship connection, as well as looking at power dynamics. So something interesting that happened within Spokane Public Schools, when things were happening, when we was looking to make a shift and a change, and when the community said, resoundingly, that you have to change. You're expelling certain students from certain demographics 4 times higher than others. You have to do something different. It actually culminated in this concept of the superintendent work group, which end up being groups of organizations from the community that end up meeting with our school district to begin to start talking about, okay, what's going to be done, and we're going to do this together. I can share stories about how that went later, but I can say today, as a product of it, we are in a very unique place with being able to interface with our community advocacy groups and all of that in particular. But I would say it very much so, it was some challenges. I can tell you that, the generational trauma that many individuals experience because the education system was apparent. But through sticking with it and doing different things, we're in a unique place right now. And I can also say something that we have continued to do, and we will continue to do, is we make sure that we keep as many doors possible open for families to be able to share in confidence with what's happening in the district. We have pathways into our school system that are very much so to where a parent, no matter who they are, they can get access to senior leadership. I'm a part of senior leadership, on the senior leadership team. Dakota is executive leader as well. So you can literally contact the superintendent, contact us, and you will, if you feel that your issue is not being resolved at a lower level. So these types of things really begin to start helping us do what we do. And someone may ask the question how we got there. Our qualitative data said, guess what? You have parents who are reporting in your family listening session that they're reporting incidents of bullying. They're reporting incidents of all kinds of things happening, racism and et cetera, and nothing's being done. And what is happening? And that's what caused us to create these structures and allocate resources to them.
You know, the other thing I want to share from that is also kind of the innovation that it takes to do these things. So thinking outside the box. So for instance, there were community organizations that were holding parenting listening sessions. And from there, they were hearing about a lot of racist issues and issues with racism and things that weren't being taken care of. And so what they did was they started inviting Oscar and myself to the meetings. And so we joined the community meetings to hear what was going on. And then we were able to address situations in real time and give, the accurate information of how to do it. The other piece that I love through the blood, sweat, and tears of relationship building, because sometimes, we're not their favorite and they're not our favorite, but, in all relationships, there's going to be conflict. And they're also, we need to be committed to resolution. And so now some of those folks that were the most difficult, I guess I would say, to work with are our biggest champions now, because we have walked alongside each other and done the hard work together. And so sometimes we don't even have to say, oh, no, that's not accurate. We'll have a community organization that steps up and says, oh, no, that's not accurate, because we've seen the data, because they make it public. And this is what is actually going on inside the schools. And so again, relationship as the foundation, and then also what Oscar keeps making sure that we understand the data pieces. The data tells the story. There's no other way to that's our anchor, for these conversations. Mm-hmm. And so this is some of the example of the school data that we look at. So, attendance, behavior, course completion. So we look at that to see if our interventions are working. Do we see a difference in even, students wanting to come to school? Because, that's tied to belonging and connectedness. Before it used to be pointing the finger at that student won't come to school, but now we're asking why, what is going on. And the same with the district-wide exclusion rates. We also have the panorama system that Oscar is going to talk more in detail about.
Yeah, so one thing in particular that can be a challenge with looking at data is that many of you are already aware of it. You can make data say different types of things. You can manipulate data. That's why it's so critical to have that quantitative data, right? Your numbers, as well as that qualitative data, the surveys. Like Nicole mentioned, the panoramic survey. We're able to, and we do this annually multiple times a year. We actually survey students and parents around their perception, as well as their sense of belonging within schools, as well as how they're feeling in particular. And we let that data inform what we're doing just as much when we begin to start looking at academic achievement, when we begin to start looking at the behavior data and all of that, as well as the course completion. Because something that we do as we disaggregate data, we have these not just dialogue, but we have honest dialogues, right? These honest dialogue lead us into a place to where when we're looking at resource allocation and we're looking at who may not being served, we know that when it comes to intervention, prevention, and a few other things, what we always discover is that many of the populations of which we're talking about, even with this webinar, even when we look at prevention, intervention, postvention, oftentimes they represent the lower echelon as far as academic achievement, as far as their behavior. When it looks, their behaviors are typically higher and their course completion is lower. And so when we look at that element, we're saying, okay, how is their sense of belonging? If we see a correlation between them not feeling like they belong and lower academics and higher behaviors and lower course completion, we know that that's connected. And that interconnectedness is oftentimes the space of which Nicole and myself and our team, as well as our superintendent leadership, kind of always ask the question, right? I can share that in our leadership meetings, You know, our superintendent in particular have come out in front of all the administrators that we have and say that, you know, let's be honest. He said this. I'm putting it on him. He's not here, so I put it on him. He said that, come on, let's be honest. How many of the students you know right now are coming to school because they're excited about this math textbook? Come on now, right? And of course, you know, everyone looks around and say, yes, you're right. We know they're not coming. Why are they coming to school? They're coming for social connecting. They're coming for belonging. They're coming to be with their peer groups or to be in a sense of stability. So how do we bolster that even more? And so that's the place that Nicole and I and others kind of like to stay in, even when we begin to start looking at our data. We're looking at it. We're looking at the quantitative, definitely, but we're also looking at the qualitative and being able, I must put this in there, and looking at the latest research around what can have an impact on our ABCs, as we call them. We know that attendance, we know that sense of belonging, all of those things can impact and increase the academics, increase the attendance, as well as lower the behavior of students. And so with that, I will say I continue, something that you're going to keep hearing us center around is this importance of looking at the whole structure, looking at the whole system at large. And so with that, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. Nicole, you want to jump in?
Yeah. So each of these are data metrics. So usually these partnerships have been in silos. So juvenile court, for instance. A little bit about me. Before I came to the school district, I've been here, I think in April will be 5 years. But before that, I was working 17 years at juvenile court. At the end of my time there, I was working in the diversion department, and I was getting, so I would see the cases that were coming across the desk and deciding kind of how we were going to, what the intervention was going to look like. And what I noticed was we were getting a lot of referrals from the school district. And so what I did was I ended up just calling downtown, that's the admin office, and saying, you know, do you realize that you're starting a child's criminal history on something, you know, that's a normal teenage brain mistake? Like, do we really want to start criminal history on that? And so with that, I started a relationship with the school district and just kind of figuring out, like, how can we work together to still have a consequence, but how do we address the situation? And so with that, we still have a great relationship with juvenile court, and we still do data sharing. And you know, if they see an uptick in school referrals or something along those lines of our SPS students coming, then we will meet and we will talk and see kind of what's going on. And the same with our community partnerships. Sometimes, you know, historically, we've looked at partnerships, again, siloed as what you can do for us. But really what we can do for each other is really understand the data that they're gathering as well, and the services that are really high needed in the community that folks are reaching out for. And sometimes we're going in on grants together to support students and families. Sometimes they just need a letter of support from the school district, you know, knowing that, yes, we support this grant and we support the work they're doing, and they have been helpful with us. And then parents and caregivers as stakeholders. So again, they're the expert on their children, right? And so traditionally, we would be going in trying to tell them about their kids as we're the expert on them. And that's not the case. They're the expert on what they need and what their children need, and what's missing in our system, and how they could feel more welcome for achievement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And additionally, when you look at this particular list of entities that are up here, some are constructs in particular, when we say community partnership in particular, I think we didn't mention the child advocacy group. Being in school systems, there used to be a time to where when there would be a child advocacy group that would come, people would be like, oh no, here they coming. Let's call our attorneys. Let's do all this different types of thing. That's not our response no more. My response in particular, and even ours, is, okay, I want to meet with them and I want to see what's going on. And even our board of directors and senior leadership is like, if we step in it, we're going to own it. That's just where we at, right? Sometimes we can be so because of the culture that was built, that had been built around, trying to make sure that we try to protect ourselves, protect our assets. It put us into a place to where we couldn't live out our mission and vision. And what we've discovered from shifting and being able to say, you know what, instead of doing that, what we're going to do instead, we're going to listen and avail ourselves to hear the stories, and something else that becomes very important. This interconnectedness between all the groups helps us when it comes down to us being able to leverage resources and make sure we can hear the voices of oftentimes the ones who feel voiceless. And what I mean, we think about our immigrant refugee population in particular, who fears the consequence of being able to share when something may be off in their experiences within our schools. We have what I call cultural brokers, individuals who are connected to various communities who can call. They can call my cell, they can call Nicole right now and say, guess what? Family at this elementary is dealing with certain type of challenges. I need for you to be aware. This is what's going on. And I personally investigated, and you need to get involved because this is not your mission and these are not your values. And that's one side. The other side, I've had, a particular advocacy group call me and say, hey, I just need to give you a heads up. I talked to this one family and I told them they need to come see you. I do have to let you know they got other issues. And so just know that I'm not siding with what they're saying. There was a national organization that called me about a case and said, I just have to let you know, we're on the district side, but you better follow this policy, right? These are the type of relationships we've been able to build. And I think it started oftentimes by us doing things, even within the superintendent work group. Each meeting, we brought school data. And in those meetings, we just had one, we brought school data about what's happening with our discipline, what's happening with various types of things. And it lent itself to being able to have this sense of to where we can talk about the issues and we can collaborate on the issues. And I think that's something that's most important. Nicole, you have anything in that area?
Nope, good.
Okay, next we want to actually talk about our total district-wide exclusion, and in a sense of transparency, showing you where our data is, showing you some successes, showing you some wandering, as well as kind of tell you where we're at right now. If you look at the chart, you will see definitely the grid off to the right-hand side of this. You would see that starting 2014, the amount of district-wide exclusion. And when we say district-wide exclusion, this what constituted an exclusion now is different. Now, I would say in 2024, it's different than what it was in 2014. Typically in 2014 in particular, we was talking about short-term suspension, long-term suspensions in particular. That's what we was looking at. The current definition right now is anytime out of the classroom. I need to make sure I set that. Anytime out of the classroom. If a student is not doing well, need to go to a common space. Anytime they're not receiving instructions, it can be considered more of it toward the exclusionary realm right now. So I want to set that precedent. But if you look at our data, you would see over 5,000, right? For close to 5,000 when it comes down to 2014 through 2016. And then you see a dip around 2016, 2017. Around this time, this is the time to where we began to start talking as a district around, is our quantitative data enough? We're seeing students being suspended, but half that data has been disaggregated. Have we separated based upon race? Have we separated based upon social economic status? Have we separated based upon individuals with IEPs 504? And the answer was somewhat. Right. And so during this time, that was a concerted effort from the district. We invested heavily into our data department, our data analytic department in particular, to clean our data up. And upon cleaning our data up, what we began to start discovering, the touch points of which we need to put even more intervention when it came to district-wide exclusion. And so when you see this number, when it actually went down, is when we was able to begin to start being able to hone our strategies in on the particular areas that was most challenging. And then you will see it when it comes down 2017 through 2019, you would see that ultimately we went up a little bit, but it's pretty much was stable. And then 2019, you know, through 2021, you see the number drastically goes down. It's total district-wide exclusions. I mean, students are mostly online, so how they gonna get excluded, right? So that speaks to that number in particular, reason why it was lower. And you're like, how did people get excluded? Because in Spokane, or in Spokane and Washington in particular, when we started back up school, everybody did not start. We had online programming. Certain student populations kind of kept with the online programming. And there was many students who did not re-enroll in school or re-engage in school. And we're starting to see numbers actually stable off right now. That's the reason why when you begin to start seeing in 2021, 22 to 23, you will see that number rise back up to 39, 23 in particular. And what that has to do with, when you look at it, if you look at that disaggregated, the numbers don't look like they did when it came back over to 2014, in part because we was able to disaggregate and because of the change when it came to policies and procedures around what constitute exclusions. And so when you look at the number, you will see a decrease, but I can tell you the number, we're not happy with it. We're not satisfied with it. But something that we do now is that we make sure we check with our community partners on what's happening. For instance, Nicole mentioned juvenile court. I was in a meeting last week with the head of juvenile court and a community meeting, and someone said that, hey, you're pushing kids out of school and you're sending them to juvenile court. And the leaders had stood up and said, hey, I have to tell you, I don't always agree with what Spokane Public Schools is doing, but I do have to tell you, we're not seeing their kids anymore. They quote a number less than the teens of them having students that was actually in there, and they said the students that we have in here are from their offenses are murder, their offenses are burglary. And so he's like, this is not the regular profile that we saw before. And it comes back to the point that Nicole said earlier. When we're in relationship, it doesn't mean we get along. It does not mean we even agree with each other, political stances and all of that. It just means that we're able to center around a focus of what's most important. And we say every kid, every day. We have quotes and mantras that lend itself to that. And personally, I can tell you, in light of everything that's happening politically within the schools, Nicole and I are the ones that's getting called oftentimes, right? When we began to start looking at Black Lives Matter as well as Blue Lives Matter in terms of what put out, I was one of the ones in particular tasked with, because of my role, talking with individuals. And what I found in every case, no matter where people was at, the lack of understanding as well as jumping on the dominant narrative end up forcing people into places and spaces to where they felt like they had to live divided, that they had to separate from their neighbors. So I felt honored that I was actually in a place to where I had the opportunity to talk with individuals about, when they say Blue Lives Matter, help me understand what that means. When you say Black Lives Matter, help me understand what's your context, right? And from doing those different types of things, building strong partnership, one thing that we was always able to settle on is that the most important thing before us is the kids that are in the classroom. And so as educators, I will take this time to say that those of you who went through some of the toughest times in education, I more than applaud you. And I'll say we definitely in Spokane appreciate what you do, because we understand that this is not easy work. And so, and I would, on that note also, I'll kind of shift a little bit and kind of talk about that, our data a little bit, but how to keep going into data in particular. Nicole?
I just want to say one thing about the previous slide real quick. So the superintendent's work, I just wanted to highlight some of the dates. So the superintendent's work group started, I believe, around 2016, 2017 year. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yep.
Also coming out of that was we changed that there's no rests at schools anymore. And so that was a huge part of exclusions as well, was that we were our school resource officers at that time. We have different positions now, but at that time we had school resource officers. They were commissioned to do arrests. And so we changed that policy. And then, we have the dip, we have the where it goes down. The other piece I want to talk about as far as the data coming back up, as we know, and I'm sure that you all are experiencing, coming out of COVID, our students are still struggling. And so again, we have to stay the course and think innovatively about how we're going to address behaviors and as in a supportive manner. How are we going to support students and families as our data starts going up a little bit. The other piece that I always remember or try to remember is that, it could be defeating to see, oh, wow, I felt like we had it. But this is work that we're always going to be chugging along. We're never going to arrive. And we are going to have to change approaches and we figure out what we need to change based off of data-driven decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And so we talked about this a little bit before about moving out of silos. One of the kind of sayings, mantras that I use when we're talking about community partnerships and supporting them coming into our schools is readiness to benefit. And so when I talk about readiness to benefit, so how have we set up the atmosphere that our community resources can come in and be successful in the interventions and the works that they're trying to do with us. So for an example, we have a partner that we have a MOU with that is Communities in Schools, and they're actually a nationwide program. But so they come in and they take a caseload of students. And again, they're doing whole child support. So, what does the family need? What does the student need to be successful? And then we have another organization called Union Gospel Mission, and they work with families that are experiencing housing insecurity. And so again, they're supporting those students that they know that are in shelters and wrapping around full case management with them. So again, moving out of silos and inviting folks, Oscar talked about the doors, inviting folks into the schools to provide the support rather than giving a paper with a phone number on it and saying, okay, well, this is where you should go after school and see if you can get resources. And so data sharing agreements. Also, again, we talked about how we will join folks as they are applying for MOUs. What we find is, applying for grants. What we find is that if we go in together, it's more likely to get a bigger grant where we can all support all of our programming that we're trying to do. 21st century grants. Oscar, a little bit more about those, but that's an example of community partners and the school being able to hire folks in our schools and in the organizations, again, to collaborate and work together to support students.
Absolutely. And I think, Nicole, something that you was very much so highlighting that I share with the group, echo it, is when you talked about data sharing agreements, memorandum of understanding, MOU, how critical it is to look at your system and what do you have set up in regards to this in relations to community partners. Many of the community partners that come and want to do great work within our schools, a lot of them are not savvy to educational lingo as well as the culture of navigation, as well as something else that many of you already know is that it could take a long time to do stuff with us. I mean, it could take a long time to get a yes or no, right? You can spend a whole year. Well, it's not like that anymore, but you can spend a whole long year in times past. I'm talking about times past. I've been around school districts for almost a couple of decades now. So in times past, individuals in schools, as I know them, no was typically, no one came out and said no. If you didn't get a reply email back, that it was implied that it was a no answer. And that does not build community. And so instead of even doing that personally, myself as well as Nicole, I sit with community partners and some of them, the leader, we want to do this, we're going to want to do that. And I would say things like, please don't take this wrong. That ain't going to happen. And I just would tell them, I'll say, it ain't going to happen. I say, I'm going to be honest. and I can tell you how it's going to play out, right? Being at the district office, I said, you're going to go to one of our schools, talk about your programming, and they're going to be like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed. This person want to bring in resources. I want their resources, but I don't want them. And that's the hardest part that I'll say when it comes to bridging gaps in particular. Being school system, sometimes we want the resources, right? We say we want the resources, and oftentimes we want it without the organizational culture that comes along with it. And so me piggybacking on data sharing agreements and memorandums of understanding, that helps to weed through all of that. That helps to build a clear understanding, and you can let community organizations know what their part can be. And the community organization can let the school know what their parts will be and can be as well. And that'll help build that cohesion that is necessary. And it gets to that transparency part. But so often we don't assess the impact of organizational culture on preventing us from getting at this good work. So I encourage individuals to actually look at best practices, research, and everything when it comes to being able to build relationships, because I have seen many frustrated community partners who didn't understand the school culture in particular. And when I explained the school culture, Nicole explained school culture, and we taught them how to navigate, they end up becoming some very stellar partners. But while we're working on systems change, there are a few things that come into play. Anything else on that, Nicole?
Well, I just think it's important to be honest and transparent from the very beginning. And so with that will be a successful project on the end, so that, you know, everyone knows exactly what to expect from each other, and exactly what is a no and is a yes, and what's a maybe. And let's talk about what that maybe looks like. I often talk about being a direct communicator. And so I'm always, you know, kind of honing that in, like, okay, we can talk about your wish list, and then now let's talk about the reality piece. It's very important to build from the beginning, rather than trying to go back and fix it on the back end.
Absolutely, absolutely. And next, I think we're looking at giving you a little bit of an example. Go.
Yeah, so a little bit of an example, and we will go into more detail in a different webinar, I believe, about the RISE program that we developed. So I mentioned earlier that I came from juvenile court before I came to the school district. And my big thing when I came to the school district, I came as a community partnership manager. But in my mind, I knew that I wanted to figure out how we could keep kids in school rather than sending them to juvenile court. So how was I going to disrupt the school to prison pipeline? And that opportunity came to go to Georgetown University and learn how to build an in-school diversion program. So I knew how to do it from the court sense, but how to do it from the school sense. And so I went to well, he wasn't superintendent at the time, but he's our superintendent now. And I said, if I could find a grant to take a group of folks to go to Georgetown and to learn this, learn how to do this, like, could I do this? And he said, well, the district doesn't have any money, but if you can find a grant that will cover it, then yes, you know, go ahead. And so with that, we knew that we needed to bring community partners along with us in order for our project to be a success. One of the biggest complaints from community partners is when we plan our stuff on our own and then we bring them in afterwards and say, so tell us what you think. And so they want to be a part of building it. They don't want to come at the end and just be asked to give their advice, right? And so we had our restorative practice manager. We had an attorney from Team Child, which was one of the organizations that is a pivotal part of the superintendent work group. We had a supervisor from juvenile court. We had our local NAACP vice president, and then we had one of our school resource officers and myself. And so we went and we got to experience kind of the book part of learning how to build this kind of program. And so then we brought it back. We had listening sessions about this is what we learned and this is what we're looking at doing. And when you talk about just the feedback that you wouldn't even think about getting, so we were calling it in-school diversion. And folks that were parents that were just as involved were like, we don't like the word diversion in there, because to me that sounds like punitive. That sounds like the justice system or the legal system, and that's not what we want. And so Oscar's very good at being creative. And so he came up with, we said rise, and he came up with the words that go in there. So restorative interventions to suspensions and expulsions. I don't know if you remember doing that, but I always appreciate his talent in that. And then we continue to have community meetings. And then again, we tied it to data. So this is why we want to create this program. This is what our data is showing. These are the students that we're seeing that are most impacted. And if we're going to make a change, let's create a program, a pilot program. And then with that, once we had that, was when we applied for the federal grant. So again, we brought this back, and the school district, said, hey, that sounds like a great program, but there's no funding for it. But if you can find funding for it, sure, this would be something great to try. And so with that, we got the federal grant, and that's how we had the opportunity to work with James and our technical assistance person.
Okay. And so talking about lessons learned for replication, if we were to share any of those things out, programming in general, family and community engagement is key. And I do need to pause a little bit, but we will have another, webinar on family and community engagement. When I say family and community engagement, I really need to kind of talk about what that means, because a lot of people use the terminology and it varies. Family community engagement for some people is having, y'all have to apologize. Sometimes I get a little humorous to myself, at least, but I'm going to say having crusted spaghetti over here this night and going to tell the community about all the wonderful things you're doing and the reason why, they should support some kind of way. That's a strategy of family community engagement. Some think is, hey, we're going to do various types of things, put something up on our website of how we appreciate our parent. That's a strategy on it. But when we talk about family community engagement, I am talking about research-based best practices. I am talking about researchers such as Dr. Karen Mapps, Dr. Joyce Epstein. I am published in this area as well. And so the unique lens of family community engagement goes deep and actually is disaggregated. And so we'll be able to get that together. But the premise behind it all is how do we build systems to where everybody can come alongside each other and their value, their worth, can be celebrated and utilized in the process of achieving a common goal. And that's when the building together. And oftentimes, what I've seen, the number one thing to stop entities, organizations in particular, from being able to work together and build together is a lack of understanding and not having a framework to work under. So when I say family and community engagement, I'm talking about the adoption of a framework so there's common language in particular to help drive what's going on. And then as you're starting to do that, part of it should be data driven decision making, to where individuals are able to begin to start looking at how important it is to utilize the data that is coming from your stakeholders. That is, when I say your stakeholders, I'm talking about what we perceive outside and inside the schools, and also knowing that within the school system, where is your board of directors at with all of this? Is there a common language? What is their philosophy? All of these factors come into play and begin to start deciding in terms of helping us, in terms of us being able to move toward what we're trying to get to. Nicole?
Well, and I, spoke previously about building together. And so building together from the beginning not only helps illuminate blind spots that we may have, but it also creates a shared responsibility in failures and successes. And so again, we have found that, the fact that we can say, oh, we made a mistake, oh, that wasn't actually done correctly. The community actually sticks up for us. Like, yes, they made a mistake, but look at all this great work they have done, and nobody's perfect, and we're all working together. So again, it's a shared, we celebrate our successes and then understand our failures and how we can work together to turn those into opportunities for success. And then the last part of the success of all students is always the North Star. So we just want to share with you that we know that this work is heavy. We know that there will be disagreement on strategies. However, if we keep our students as our North Star, change is possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, James, I'm wondering, are you back in? There you go.
I sure am. I sure am. Thank you very much for all those wonderful nuggets. And as I put in the chat, if you have questions, please feel free to stick them in the chat or in the Q&A box. And I'm going to use my privilege or advantage as moderator to ask the first question, because when we're engaged with communities throughout the country, we often hear schools saying, man, this community violence intervention stuff, this is really interesting. We want to be engaged in that, but we don't quite understand, like, what would our role be in this? And they're often thinking about, their traditional prevention programs and not necessarily, this intervention-based approach. A lot of times we're also talking about, we know who the students are that are suspended, but we don't necessarily have a policy in place to ensure that if they are off campus, that we're still engaged with them, because we know that when they're off campus, we're likely to increase the likelihood of violence or victimization. Or we don't have a policy in place where when they come back to campus, that they're supported. Can you tell us, and I know this was in your equity resolution, but how do you all as a school system see your role in this community violence intervention effort and really honing in on, not necessarily your entire school, but maybe the 20 to 50 students in your school that require a lot of support so that they're not engaged in violence or victimization moving forward?
No, great question. Nicole, did you want to go first?
Nope, you can.
Okay, great question, James. And what I'd say in particular is one thing when it comes to us, one thing I'll say has to happen, and there has to be a philosophical shift. The idea that the students are mined from an 8 to 3, 8 to 1, 8 to 2, is something that end up being counterproductive in terms of what we try to achieve. And something that has to happen that we actually engaged in is pretty much being a committed partner for inside the school district, as well as for our community partners on helping with that philosophical shift. And as an example of that, I mentioned earlier talking about cultural brokers, right? We have our Pastor Sean, who is the cultural broker. So when it comes down to gang violence, if we start to hear the potential of gang violence start to be surfaced around the school and some of our high schools, oftentimes Pastor Sean is brought in and he immediately engages the community, right? Sometimes before the kids even leave, and he goes and he actually talks as a culture broker with them about what's happening and helps to resolve things. And so when it comes to it, we move away from this mindset, James, that can happen in schools, is that long as it don't happen on the school campus, it ain't my issue. To a place of saying, do you know what? If the potential for violence is happening anywhere, it is our issue because we are in the community, we are part of the community, and just because the incidents happen at the park don't mean that it won't show up at the school the next day. And I can tell you, James, I've seen, and over the course of 4 or 5 years, there have been stuff that happened, in the community, and through the use of this intervention model that we use, right? Oftentimes, majority of the time, 98% of the time, it never comes on school campus, and we're able to quell it even when it comes into the community. Another example I'll give is that this is an interesting phenomenon. We have our Pacific Islander population, and there was incidents that happened And very much so, people was, you know, it looked like it was going to turn into some gang violence. And I told people, nope, you gotta be careful. That specific out in the conversation. Don't dare mess with Auntie. It ain't nothing's going to stop. But by having people like Pastor Sean, we have like a Rick Kaboo, we have other people who are pretty much can interface with those communities to start addressing the potential of violence in the community, but they are school employees. And so these are ways that we actually get at those things. And I know many people who are listening are probably doing those things, but I would say definitely look at the ideal and concept of the cultural broker, having individuals going in spaces that you cannot go in. Because there's many reasons why school staff can't get involved in certain things, and that's policy and procedure, what you're talking about in particular, as well as collective bargaining agreements and all of that. But I think when it comes to innovation, as you can tell, I perk up when you talk about innovations and you talk about different things when it comes down to that needs innovative solutions. I love living in that place. Did I answer the question, Jane?
Love it, love it, love it. We have a bunch of more questions that are coming in. One of the questions focuses around data and how do you address the issues of data? There was also another one from an outside organization. We have outside organizations that are looking to access information. It might be grades, attendance, disciplinary records.
Yeah.
How do you go about, so you have this, you know, if we're talking about a intervention population, we're probably talking about a specific number of young people. And if you're talking about those specific number of young people, if you're working together and collaboratively, you want to be able to share data, but you also have to be very mindful that these are folks under 18 and there's some specific issues that you all at schools have to address. Talk a little bit about that.
So with our data agreements, we have there's a specific way to do that. And so one of those ways is having parent permission. And the other ways is we have folks who, there's an MOU that says there will be a data sharing agreement, again, with parent permission. And so, and that way they are able to track the ABCs, attendance, behavior, course completion, and to put their interventions in place based on the data. And again, we also are very aware that organizations need this data as they're applying for grants. And so again, it's shared responsibility and commitment to students.
Definitely, Nicole. I'll say efficiently, to echo what you said, data sharing agreements, looking in the school and see if they have a policy procedure around it. And if they do not, I would, you know, look at example school district. As a side note for the community organization that acts that, it's interesting how school districts like to look at other school districts for examples. I think community organizations do it, but it's a little different within the school context. From what I've seen and witnessed, because I've been with community organizations and school, and I definitely appreciate you. I would also say that depending on your size of your caseload, the thing you was talking about and what they're talking about, James, is school districts having to adhere to the FERPA laws in particular when it comes down to data sharing. Even around those laws in particular, the data, parents have full access to data in particular, and you can check with the local school and with the parent and saying, hey, do you want to put me down as for some, not every school system, do you want to put me down as an emergency contact so I can have access? That is not an efficient way to do something of the sort, but if you're a smaller organization working with 10, 15 kids and stuff, and you working with their families directly, like more in a 2gen model, that may be something that you look at, or what they call a release of information form, ROI. Many of the counselors knows about these particular types of things in certain school districts. Getting the ROI on file, that's another thing. And when you go to data sharing agreement, everything that I shared is actually stepped up. If you're talking about organization to organization, big numbers, that's something you're looking at. Something else that I can tell you with Washington State at the very least, and I'm pretty sure other states have it as well, is the whatever the office of superintendency for the state is, typically for them to receive the type of funding they get from the federal government, they must keep data. So sometimes looking on their websites can be a way to get broad stroke data. You can't get the individual student data, but you can get the broad stroke demographic data as well as low income data, the ones that's accessing free and reduced lunch and all of that.
Great.
And I've had folks in other districts, reach out to us for me to show them like a blanket,
Yeah.
what does a MOU look like and because they're starting to do that type of work. And so I would be happy to do that as well.
All right, I'm just writing some notes. So a couple of things. I saw Richard's question. Yes, the video is going to be on our website. I'll provide a link a little bit later. I also want to give you a preview of coming attractions on the 26th. We're going to be, well, before the 26th, we're going to be sending information out about what we call office hours, community practice office hours, where we're going to invite Oscar back to answer more of your questions. So we'll just, kind of highlight the main themes of this webinar. But this is a session for you all to ask any types of questions you have around data and how it is utilized. I think we're really honing in on the process by which schools collect data to identify where they can put resources, both personnel and programmatic resources, to engage intervention populations. Back to the questions. We got one from Megan Scott. She asks, what kind of variables would you recommend collecting on how students are affected by nearby gunfire?
That is good. That is good. Definitely the, I'll say in the quantitative realm, I would very much so look at their attendance. That can be an indicator. Because in some attendance notes, parents can share the rhyme and reason why they're not attending. Washington State actually has enacted in law now that if students call in and cite anything that's in the mental health arena, is considered an excused absence. That's trackable data. That would be something I look at. Something else would be, as far as looking at variables in particular, that would be, wow, possibly, Nicole, I'm thinking, and you can chime in, I'm thinking being able to, if you're talking about from the school perception, being able to, if you got a relationship with the school, being able to maybe have an ROI, so you can talk with counselors and various individuals to get more of that qualitative data about it.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was looking around, I thought, oh, I do have it. There's a book called Uneasy Peace by Patrick Sharkey, and he talks about the impacts of students impacted by gunfire and how it impacts the brain, so that you almost kind of go down a couple of grades in the immediate aftermath of being impacted by that trauma. So yeah, definitely check out let me see it. Uneasy Peace by Patrick Sharkey. It's a really great read. A lot of helpful information on there. Juan, good to have you on the call. He's from the Giffords Foundation, and they do amazing work throughout the country on this issue. And he asked a question that we hear over and over, and one of the major challenges, and while it's not necessarily related to data, I think this is a really great question for folks who work inside the school system. But partners that are working on community violence intervention, they often have staff that have a criminal record and are doing this amazing work in the community, and they know the students in the schools, but they have a criminal record, and some schools are like, oh, I know James from way back when, and he was somebody that we don't want in, or they been arrested. What is the process, or is there a process? And I know this varies across the state and across these states. What's the process maybe in Spokane to engage with individuals that have records?
Sometimes it's the length of time between the incidences and how far back that has been. Sometimes it is that combined with recommendations from community vouching for them. Sometimes it's, okay, let's be creative and meet at a community center rather than in the school, but still accessing the programming, so running groups and type, but with the school. And then we have a program, for instance, where, so for tiered behavior, so tier 1 would be all students, tier 2 would be some students having some behavior issues, tier 3 a lot of exclusionary issues due to behavior. So we have a program that works with Tier 3 students that works on school re-engagement, and that was through a community grant. And the folks, the mentors that do the 2-tier mentoring are folks that have history, but they also have the community folks vouching for the changes that they have made. And how we talk about it from the school system is these are the students that there's nobody in the school that has been able to reach them. And
Yep.
so again,
Yep.
if students are our North Star, this is going to be our focus.
Definitely. And I also would put in there, you know, the different strategies come into play. It depends on where your system is at and what type of policy procedures have been developed. That's something that you want the school district to look at. And I say the other piece in particular is if you're an outside organization, I highly recommend finding your school district champions. And your school district, I can guarantee in almost every school district, there are individuals who are behind the work that you're doing. They're so passionate about it and they understand it to a certain degree, which affords them the opportunity to be able to recodify, reinterpret programming in a way that can be adopted within school system. For example, I don't think I shared this with James before. I know Nicole probably know it. Prior to coming in school districts, I worked for school district. I worked for community organization. I worked for what they call the Going Home Initiative, right? To where we transitioned what was considered the most violent serious offenders from prisons back into the community. And when I say community, getting them connected to school, getting them connected to resources in particular. My primary role was to travel to prisons across Washington, meet with individuals and help paint the picture of success for them and put mentors around them. And so I think, without even thinking about it, soon as I hear the story of someone maybe with a background and all this kind of stuff, I think of the value that they bring because of the experience. So I'll be considered, Nicole will be considered some of those champions within the school district. And I can tell you that they're at various levels. Of course, we say the higher, the better. And sometimes I would refute that. I would say it depends on where they're at in terms of it, because oftentimes when you're talking about that particular area, you're dealing with the challenges that the community brings around that as well, right? The community, when at large, rarely talks about, you know, individuals of color being incarcerated at crazy rates compared to other ethnic groups for crimes and all the low-level crimes and all of that. And so I would say while you're strategizing and all those types of things, I highly encourage you to, if you can find those champions to brainstorm with you and help you navigate the system and beyond. And the last piece I would encourage anybody, to Nicole's point, is when she said sometimes working with a community partner, as a community organization, certain schools, a lot of schools, when it finally done on them, they're going to know that they need you. And when they move to that place to where they need you, oftentimes you'll hear them saying things like, we want to have you, but we can't because of this policy, this policy, this policy. I would say don't let that deter you from still designing your programming and working with the youth family as well as the educators on being able to build something that may work even within the community context, right? Because something that can happen is that when you think about what's happening within a school day, the whole school day is really designed around instruction, right? You have passing periods and you got lunch periods. And so when you look at major intervention, you're talking about outside of normal school hours. And so location means things, and I don't want to discredit that. Whatever, I can tell you, I wouldn't let location be the #1 barrier to doing the work, which I know you're not, but that's what I want to put out there from having the institutional knowledge as well as coming from the community partner stance.
Very good, Oscar. Thank you. We got 3 more minutes. I think that question also is kind of a preview of coming attractions. As we move forward, in March, we're going to have a webinar focused on school-based partnerships to implement CVI. And as we continue to move along the trajectory, We're going to talk a little bit more about Oscar and Nicole's RISE program. And Alejandro, Dr. Alejandro, good to have you on as well. They'll talk a lot about the positive role models that they have put in schools and the different personalities of these individuals to make sure that they're connected. You have to have the right connections, and you can't, if somebody is like super into sports and you're partnering them with somebody who's very academic, the mesh point is probably not going to be there. And they've really been very intentional about who these connections are that they are providing to schools. But the other thing, back to Juan's point, the preview of coming attractions is a safe passage program. Partnering with community-based partners, what we're seeing is more and more students are fearful of getting violence to and from schools.
Yeah.
And utilizing schools and community partners to understand, and obviously the students, where those places are, and utilizing these community partnerships to put credible, trusted, and trained adults at those locations that can diffuse, de-escalate, and connect these students with additional services. So real quick, if you can just do one more slide, Oscar, move the next slide. So just as a reminder, we're closing things down here. For the webinar and PowerPoint, check out this QR code. We're also going to drop the link in the chat one more time, although it'll probably happen at the very end of this. And then also, if you have any school-based CVI questions, please fill out a training and technical assistance form. Again, we're going to have the next webinar in March focusing on partnerships. And Dr. Harris, Nicole, you all are treasures in this area, in this field, and especially for the students of Spokane. Thank you very much for participating in this. I've also dropped in the chat, and we'll share additional resources. The Spokane equity policy. Oscar and Nicole are also writing a piece that's going to be a follow-up to this webinar. So lots more opportunities for engagement from you all. And if you give me a moment, I will stick in the website one more time for the school-based stuff. But if you're not interested in get that link, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, participating, asking questions, and thank you again to Oscar and Nicole. And I'm going to get that link here in 1 second.